Hello, there's a public dialogue underway at GIBS in conjunction with Rios partners, looking at some of the challenges facing South Africa, including the question of trust, how it's built, does it need to be rebuilt perhaps, and can we do so in a way that helps dialogue around difficult issues. Joining us now is Vice-Chancellor of Wits University, Professor Adam Habib. Adam, greetings and welcome. When it comes to trust, how much trouble are we in?
I think we're in serious trouble. I think that partly one of the problems is that most people think that the lack of trust is simply because of a clash of people coming from different racial backgrounds. I don't really see that as the serious problem of trust. I think that the real problem of trust is a lack of class trust, where people come from different class circumstances and are beginning to struggle and feel that people do not take them seriously. So people in very poor and marginalized contexts believe rich people, both black and white, don't think about them, don't think about their circumstances, don't think about wanting to prioritize their life circumstances. And rich people don't take poor people's concerns seriously. And that's the challenge. Now, if you listen to government or you listen to big business, what they talk about is black business versus white business. I think poor people see a problem with both sets of businessmen. White business because of where they are and they see themselves in very isolated circumstances. But black businessmen, many of whom simply looking at taking their share at the feeding trough and not really representing poor people's interests. So I think that's the real challenge, that the problem of trust really is a reflection of the nature of inequality in our society and not simply the issue of racial polarization.
Let me be clear, it's not poverty, it is inequality.
Absolutely. And I think that that's the real lesson we've not internalized. If you see what's happening in Marikana, if you see what's happening in Gibbons, if you see the violence that is happening in many of our service delivery protests, those are a reflection of rage in the society. And rage is a product of relative deprivation. A deprivation, but a deprivation that is relative. You see yourself deprived because somebody else is not being deprived. If you're sitting in Alexandra, you know that your poverty is the product of the wealth that exists across the bridge at Sandton. And that's why poor societies go to Senegal, go to Burundi, go to many places on the African continent. Poor societies don't have the violent crime we have. You can get up in the evening and walk across the street and go to a restaurant and you will not get mugged and killed for it. In South Africa, you will. The big difference is that we are much more unequal society, even though we are a richer society than many other societies on the continent. Our problem is inequality. That doesn't mean poverty is not a problem. We have to deal with it. But beyond simply addressing poverty, we have to deal with inequality. Otherwise, we don't deal with the causal features that create Marikana and the Gibbons and similar violent protests.
How would you go about doing that?
Well, it seems to me that we have to deal with increasing incomes at the base of society and constraining incomes at the top. So, for instance, the National Development Plan and the New Growth Pact have got a series of measures which I would support around increasing incomes at the bottom, targeting labor-intensive sectors, small business development, getting employment, going through a whole series of employment measures, setting up and establishing a youth wage subsidy or youth incentives, setting up a series of measures which I think the National Development Plan covers wonderfully in a variety of ways. But the problem is, of course, that deals with poverty. It increases income at the base of society. What it doesn't deal with is income at the top end of society. And because these guys own assets, land, property, bonds, stocks, they will grow faster than the guys at the bottom, which is why if you look at a place like India or China, you've had poverty alleviation, but inequality is increasing. Now, South Africa starts off with the most unequal levels of inequality in the world. It has the highest level of inequality. And if we increase it even any further, the society will burn. And so the big issue is, how do you grow these guys at the bottom but constrain these guys at the top? One way to do it is to make them grow faster. And that means even more interventions. The second way to do it is to constrain the guys at the top. And the way you constrain the guys at the top is through some kind of incomes policy. Many market economies have done this. The Netherlands did it, Ireland did it, etc. And that is, how do you make sure that the person at the top end grows slower than the person at the bottom end? One simple example. If you Maria Ramos or any of the CEOs of the banks, what you do is you say to them symbolically, what you do is you take an inflation-linked increase. So nothing beyond inflation. What happens, and you time bind it, 3 years. If you're earning 30 million, like many of these CEOs of banks do, 5% increase is effectively 1.5 million rand a year. It doesn't change your life circumstances in any way. But what it does is it allows these guys at the bottom to grow faster than these guys at the top, and inequality levels come down. And there are examples of how you could do this. Our problem is we're coupling poverty alleviation measures with black economic empowerment. And black economic empowerment is not simply empowerment to the broad base. It's enrichment for the politically connected. And that increases inequality quite dramatically, and that's the difference between South Africa and Brazil over the last 10 years.
And where, Adam, do the politicians fit into this? Because it seems to many South Africans they have their noses as deeply in the trough as the captains of industry.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely true, which is why I would like 2 or 3 measures. The first measure is I think that any politician, any member of the cabinet, any senior official, and I would like to see most members of the NEC of the ANC not having businesses that is doing private businesses that deal with the state. I think it should be banned completely. I think if you want to be a billionaire, absolutely go ahead and be a billionaire. What you shouldn't do is be a billionaire and double dip as a cabinet minister. And I think that's the real challenge. So I would like to see that as a major problem resolved initially. I also think we should, at the symbolic level, contain expenditures. I don't see why we cannot say, for instance, no new renovations for government houses unless there are exceptional reasons for that, unless it impacts on legal compliance or this thing. I think that that's something we could do. I think we are saying to cabinet ministers, no new cars for the next 3 years, time bound. Those are measures that would show and send a very important message and signal to the system as a whole and to the citizen as a whole that people are taking seriously. So I do think that there are measures that we can put into place. But I think if we don't do that, sooner or later South Africa will burn. I say this, I don't mean to be populist in this message. I think South Africa is beginning to burn. I think there's a rage building at the base of society. I think Marikana is an example of that. And I unfortunately do not see opposition parties being able to articulate those poor people's interests. That's the problem. I mean, it is striking that when Marikana happened, not a single opposition party, at least not the DA, not the big opposition parties, none of them went to Marikana. I know of no society in the world where the opposition party wouldn't capitalize on what had happened in Marikana. Yet, not a single opposition member went to Marikana. That's the real tragedy of South African society.
Adam Habib, thank you.
My pleasure.